what I tried to do here is put together a collection of ideas, because I don't think of sustainability as any one thing. I think it's a mindset, and I think it's just a variety of very deliberate actions that an organization takes to make sure that it's here for a really long time. So I'm just going to kind of, you'll get a little glimpse into my brain, and we're going to kind of wander through the Berkey as I know it. And many of you know the Berkey very well. Some of you maybe not as well. And I would say feel free to interrupt me at any time, but you may not be able to. And so, as we go along, just take notes and whatnot, but we'll see where it takes us. So for anybody that doesn't know me, just as a brief overview, I always like to start with, I grew up in Phillips, Wisconsin, so not far from here. And my parents are both teachers. Ended up in the Twin Cities for quite some time, went to St. Olaf College, and then shortly after that actually coached at Carleton College, which, if any of you know, are both in Northfield, and was a little bit of a weird experience, but nevertheless, skied my whole life, grew up skiing. My wife Megan and I, and moved back to the area, if you will, in 2013. But previous to that, I was teaching at Great River School, which was a charter Montessori school for high school in the Twin Cities, which is a little bit of a unique Montessori. Oftentimes it doesn't get into the high school grades. And so it was a new charter school, and I learned a lot about outdoor and environmentalism and education through that. It was really actually pretty formative years for me in terms of how sustainability can enter into sport, because at the same time I was doing Endurance Athlete, which was a private training group and athletes that I had started. So that was sort of my formative years in sustainability, and then I moved up here, and here we are since 2013. So I think of the Berkeys always kind of fun to think of the history. And again, not that anybody doesn't in the call maybe know the history, but I look at that picture and say, in 2013, did Tony really realize that 50 plus or 40 plus years later, there was going to be the economic engine that it is, and as many people that come to this area because of it? And I don't know if he had sustainability in the back of his mind at that time, but there were some things that he did that really were very sustainable. And as we look through it and get through here, but it's come a long way, obviously, since then. And the foundation was formed in '84. And so since then, it's been a 501c3 ever since then. That it has three parts to the mission. Obviously not only to promote world-class events, but the trail, and certainly more than ever now, getting people active outside is a way of life, I think. And then just some great, I think, fun event pictures. The Berkey, obviously, being the largest and sort of the one that many know. But I think when we get to this point, and I actually pretty purposely put this slide together, but why does sustainability matter? And I think, it matters for different people for different reasons, but for me, it's all about the next generation. Youth is something that I think is so important to offer this lifestyle at a young age. And to me, when we can have an organization and events that are sustainable, it affords a huge opportunity for the next generation. And that's, I think, what our organization and staff really aim to provide. But let's look at one of the reasons I think sustainability is important to get the conversation started. And I think many of you may have known of this, but in 2014, an economic impact study was done in the area. And it was about the silent sports, but then it started to break it out into the other parts of not only just skiing, but also mountain biking in the silent sport industry. And it's these are some statistics that came out of it. $4 million on the race weekend are spent this was in Bayfield, Sawyer County. 26 million of non-resident spending. But I think more than anything, the dollars that flow in over that period estimated to support 225 jobs. So you start to realize when something like the Berkey, if it no longer remains sustainable, what is the consequence of that? I mean, and the consequence can be a lot of different things as we think about it over time. It could be everything from no more trails and the environment, but even the simple fact of the jobs and the economic driver that it is, I think, is something that oftentimes gets overlooked. And I think, to me, this is one that's really important because those dollars go and provide a lot to a lot of people. this slide is something that I think is kind of interesting that maybe people don't realize, and you wouldn't unless I told you perhaps, but that if you look at the Cable Hayward area as a region, if you drop the dot and went 50 miles, 90% of the Berkey's income comes from outside of that 50-mile radius. On the flip side of that, 89% of it is spent within the 50 miles. So what we're finding with silent sport is what obviously we know best, but tourism-driven recreation is that it really flows money into the region, and more often than not, that money gets spent here. So anytime that we can create events or programs or opportunities to draw people here, they're going to spend money here and it draws money here. So if we're able to make sure that it happens year over year, back to the sustainability piece, then we can see the positive economic impact of that. And I think this is again, I know the Berkey the closest. I can't speak for some of the other organizations in the area, but when we think about one of the real reasons, just from the X's and O's of dollars, why sustainability is important, and we'll get to some of those things, what we're trying to do to remain sustainable. This is a really motivating factor as an organization to say, wow, okay, we put a lot of money into this local area. If we're able to grow and sustain, it just means that much more area for our little local community. There's 881 residents in Cable, I think, and another 2,300 in Hayward. So you start to realize it's a pretty significant number. Okay, so that's just one of the many reasons why I think sustainability is important. But so I thought I'd start with that. But then, so what are the keys? What is it as an organization that we look and say, okay, what are the things that we need to do to make sure that we're going to be sustainable for, if nothing else, the previous generation, that we're here for that, but also the economic driver. I mean, now more than any, you realize in this COVID time more than anything, the importance of outdoor recreation and the importance of the events and or the organizations that are happening here, because it really drives a lot of livelihood, certainly, but also brings a lot of money to the economy and stimulates our local communities. We look at, certainly the trail is the number one component to having sustainable events, in that it is the medium, right? If you don't have if you put on golf events and you don't have a golf course, you don't have anything. If you are put on swimming events and you don't have a place to swim, it's gone, right? So for us, even though there's a variety of programs we put in that aren't necessarily specifically on the Birkie Trail, the Birkie Trail is in and of itself by far where we spend our most money, and we'll get to that a little bit later, but also it just becomes this absolute thing that is the most important. And when we look at what does it mean to make it the most important, there's a variety of things there. Obviously, it's access is really important, because if you don't have access to it, when you need it, you're not able to put on the events. The infrastructure that's required to be around it. So I think when you start to look at how do you become sustainable, I like to share a little story, and this is how we can go well past our 30 minutes, of course, but I never forget when I first got here, when Shelley Milford told me how we delivered water to the aid stations, I almost immediately resigned. I was like, well, how in the world are we ever going to be able to continue to do that year after year after year? There's so many little places that something could go wrong, and if something could go wrong, it shuts down the event. So there's these vulnerabilities, and one of the keys to sustainability is reducing vulnerabilities, in my opinion. So we're looking always for how do we reduce these vulnerabilities. So in the case of 2014 then rolls around, we get to 2014, we're gonna have the Berkey, a huge snowstorm shows up right before it, you probably all remember it, and we almost can't get water into 3 aid stations. So we're able to do everything else. We get the parking plowed out, we get the trail groomed, but we can't get water to 3 aid stations because it takes these huge trailers to get up to them to deliver the water. There's a huge vulnerability there. So now we have to go to medical and say, well, if we can't, and emergency services, if we can't provide water at 3 of these aid stations, what do we do? Are you okay with us still having the race? Fast forward, of course, there's like supermen like Mark Rasmussen who are able to save the day. Next thing you know, we can get water there, and it worked out just fine. But my point with that story is just that we're always looking to make sure that we can reduce vulnerabilities as a way to ensure stability and sustainability into the future. just a map. You guys know it. Every time I look at it, it impresses me that not only just the sheer distance of it, there's trails that are certainly longer, but just the amount of cooperation that goes into making that trail happen, and the vision that Tony had so long ago to really make it function, and that, hey, this is going to be really happen. All the work that goes into it, obviously, the wayfinding systems to access. One of the things that I think is also really important is the safety component to sustainability. There's, for many of us, there's been just a recent tragedy along the trail with EMS, and it's been interesting now, due to the tragedy, the coming together of all of the entities that are involved with the Birkie Trail, from Sawyer County, Bayfield County, town of Lenroot, town of Hayward, city of Hayward, town of Cable, coming together to say, okay, we collectively have to make this safer, because if it's not safe over time, people won't come. So the next one next to vulnerability is safety. If you don't provide a safe environment, that the sustainability isn't going to be there. People are going to see too much risk and say, forget it, I'm out. So this concerted effort into safety alongside of vulnerability are two areas that are paramount when we come to that medium, again, of the trail or wherever you're going to host your event. And I think then that eventually shows, and recognition comes with that. In 2016, USA Today won the greatest ski destination. And the irony that I love about that is when you look at the other places that were in that running, Trapp Family Lodge, places that have these huge lodges, and really what's shown through here was the trail, that it's a trail that really creates this medium for all these things. And it's more important than, how big the chalet is, or if you got 4-course meals, than anything. I'm actually on a couple of the statewide boards. I'm on the Governor's Tourism Council. I'm on the Governor's State Trail Council. And one of the things that I really brought to light recently, and I think it's really important to point out here, is that we're really getting outspent in the state right now. The state of Michigan, the state of Minnesota, Illinois, North and South Dakota are spending millions of dollars on outdoor recreation. The state of Wisconsin, nearly nothing. They've now created an Office of Outdoor Recreation, but the fear is these surrounding states are putting huge amounts of dollars into places that can recreate in these areas that are then becoming sustainable because they have the funding. In Wisconsin, it is still very much up to the friends groups, the foundations, to raise the money to make these viable. And, I hate to use the analogy keeping up with the Joneses, but if we as a state don't start spending more money on it, I think collectively, pretty soon you're going to see not everyone's going to remain sustainable, because the funding is just, there's only so many dollars to be raised. And frankly, if you're in the Twin Cities, you're not really care if you're going to northern Wisconsin or northern Minnesota. You want to go to the coolest outdoor recreation destination. And so right now we have that. And we have amazing organizations like Canva and the Berkey and whatnot raising money for these outdoor recreation components. But I fear the sustainability of it from a financial standpoint can start to wane if we don't prioritize the funding. And I think it actually has to come also from the state level, not just the local level. Even our state parks are solely funded by user groups oftentimes and friends groups, so that can be a problem. Public-private partnerships. This is something that I think is really, really important to sustainability. It's just partnerships in general. These are the ones that we work with from our organization standpoint. But when you look at it in a broader sense, anytime there's an event, especially here in this area, we have everything obviously from townships, but to the National Park Service, Forest Service, and county forests. We don't always have control of those lands. We have the ability to utilize them, and those are relationships that are really important to us, of course, because without them, we wouldn't have any of this, back to the trail being important. But understanding these level of partnerships are really important, and that's something that we often work really hard on. And, obviously many of you, or some of you that use the Birkie Trail just recently, is a great example of that. There was a recent logging cut that happened just north of O. That is one that it was a huge aspen clear cut that ultimately I think was a huge bummer in that it's really ugly. And certainly they could have, I think, accomplished the Aspen clear cut in a variety of ways, still maintaining some of the aesthetics, but it didn't, they didn't think that that would be an issue. And, certainly it's our job as the friends group, if you will, and the stewards of the trail to continue to remind them, yes, you are the land manager, and yes, you're creating lots of dollars, but so is tourism and so is outdoor recreation. So from a sustainability standpoint, you're trying to make a sustainable forest. We're trying to make sustainable recreation. And if we don't meet and marry in the middle, then this doesn't work long-term. Again, it's no longer sustainable. If you cut down every tree in Sawyer County Forest, the Birkie Trail will cease to exist. On the flip side of that, if we don't let you cut down any trails and you don't make any trees and you don't make any money, you make $2.5 or $3 million a year, then we understand that too is detrimental to the county of Sawyer County. So there's that marrying and that symbiotic relationship that has to happen there. And then there's community. I think we all recognize it, but I think it's important to point it out that without community, you can't have a sustainable event. 3,000 people in the case of the Berkey, but even smaller events require huge numbers of community support. And I think oftentimes that can get overlooked when you just come in, you do your thing, we need some volunteers. If you don't build a robust program around the community volunteer and what they bring, I think it really becomes detrimental. And I think too, that is no longer sustainable. But just to put a couple of slides here, I think by creating a strong partnership with the community support, we can then build some ancillary positives, if you will, that come from it. By the event bringing in revenue, we can create some other things that become positive recreation for the day-to-day community user that maybe wouldn't be there otherwise. Extra youth programs and just extra ways to get outside. I think of some of the youth programs that we have here in Hayward and Cable. I don't know a lot of areas that have as extensive of youth programs and as a variety in such a rural area. Certainly in downtown Minneapolis and the Lopid and some of the bigger organizations that have more funding have the ability to have a lot of youth programs. But in rural settings, to have the amount of youth program that we have here is simply unheard of, especially the variety. And so that, I think, comes from the strong partnership between the events that bring in some money and then the community members that are willing to volunteer to help put it on. Big benefit all the way across. The other thing that I think is just another little benefit from the sustainability of the events, the more they grow, is it can bring visibility and attention to the community. This was the Berkey Bridge, of course, in downtown Minneapolis, estimated 70 million views as part of the Super Bowl in 2018. NBC Booth was on top of it. And again, I can't tell you how many times being down there, people are like, where is Hayward, Wisconsin? What's the Birkebeiner in 8,000 different languages on everything from BBC to CNN to C-SPAN and everything in between. So I think, and that doesn't happen overnight, right? This happened starting in 1973. You built a race that was going to eventually become 47 years old. That's what then allows something like this to happen. So again, I think it just harkens back to, if you're not in it for the long haul, you don't get these opportunities. A 3 or 4 year organization isn't going to have this kind of opportunity and have the time to build a partnership. So that's, again, another one of those important pieces of sustainability is it starts to create greater global visibility for your area, your region, what then almost, again, draws in more. Okay, so now that we're 20 minutes in, we finally got to Birkie Green. And this is our initiatives on how we're able to continue what we're putting our energies towards to trying to create sustainable, nearly 100,000 users last year. We actually are investing right now in more trail counters because we want a better way of really understanding and quantifying how many people are using the trail, but pretty darn close to 100,000, not including mountain bikers. This is simply when we started to look at skiers. Now that said, Mike Manley, for instance, is counted not just as one, he'd be counted as every time as a user. So don't think of it as 100,000 unique users, although the number is very close because there is, believe it or not, we as local users that use the trail often are small in numbers compared to the bigger group of folks coming. This was just a little info grid that was back from 2019. But I think it shows one of the things that we were trying to convey is we invest a lot in the trail. That year was close to $400,000 plus another near $1 million in our capital expenditures along the trail, which mostly was infrastructure and buildings and trail repair. And and that is a big focus of our organization. One of our failings oftentimes is not promoting what we're doing in that regards, but I think we're realizing internally, if you don't invest in it, you're not sustainable. And so that's something, again, that is important for us. One of the things that we had a huge initiative as we launched Birkie Green was trash. This was pretty darn cool. In 2019, we finished the Birkie Trail Run. Cool Planet and Paul Thompson and a group helped us do a bunch of recycling. We ended up that year with about 1,000 runners. We had a single bag of trash. One bag of trash. That was it. Everything else was either composted or recycled. And so we were really proud of that. And one of the things that we learned from a sustainability standpoint was, again, small event as a whole. I mean, we reduced some trash. We felt good about it. But what we also did was we created a bunch of advocates, because normally we would have just put a sign up. And what we learned is you can't just put a sign up. You need to have somebody there talking to people about what and why and how, and no, don't throw your can there, it goes over here. Well, suddenly by doing that, not only was it successful in that we had a single bag of trash, but I think it was also successful in that many of those 1,000 people interacted with somebody and talked about recycling. So I think we felt like we created a bunch of advocates at that point. And I think that is important to the sustainability piece too, that eventually we need to create more advocates and people understanding. So education is a big part of this, that we have to be actively educating people on what we're trying to do to make sure that our environment is sustainable. We're not just throwing trash in it, because again, if that medium goes away, the event goes away. You know, this solar charging station, just as of today, I will let you all know, you're the first to know, we installed the new charging station in Birkie Trailhead. It was functional as of today, so you can plug in when you're up in cable. We've had a big push, not big push, but many asking about this after we installed the first one. Will we continue to install more? If we're coming from Chicago, Twin Cities, et cetera, that we really want to plug in, we can't get back without it. Interestingly enough, for us, we absolutely want to, and will continue to. As I said, we just put another one in Birkie Trailhead, but getting to scale up on this is difficult. One of our challenges right now is trying to scale to meet demand on weekends, but not during the week. The capital expense required to invest into charging stations right now is really quite expensive to meet demand for visitors coming in that are really pretty hard to monetize right now without pretty sophisticated systems. So this is a challenge for us, but I think moving towards electric vehicles, because right, we're a destination. People don't live here. They come here. Well, I shouldn't say that. A small amount of us live here, but many more come here. And when they come here, if we want them to come in electric cars, we're going to need to find the ways to charge them. Louise has been very active in the Berkey store about the garment she chooses. We've actually chosen many different manufacturers that now cost more money, but they're using often recycled fibers. That's an important one for her. And we are just going to start to do some more campaigns around that. That, you know what, that t-shirt does maybe cost $3 more, but it's done with 95% recycled fibers. Some of those things that, again, just helps people realize that when you're in it, that it gives us just another talking point, especially in the retail end of things. Solar passive is important. We spent a few hours, more than a few hours, with a design firm in the Twin Cities, along with Terry Penman, who did the eventual design on how we were going to put some design elements into this building. Very rarely in the winter does the heat turn on in this building. It's incredible. Now, that said, we haven't, unfortunately, is warm in the summer because we didn't have as much funds to invest some of the other entities, other things that would have helped it in the winter, or in the summer, excuse me. But in the winter, very rarely does the heat turn on. The passive solar has been really fantastic. And so that was something that was important to us as we went down that road. And the Wisconsin DNR was a pretty big partner on helping us do that. The other one was bags. You know, I mean, we order 11,700 plastic bags every year. And again, you know, it's just a little thing, obviously, when you think of the whole globe. But I think that was one of the very first things that came to mind as the team came together and said, where can we start to reduce? Because we don't want to fill up landfills any longer. Sustainability of ensuring all of our users. And this campaign with the bag, we've now sold almost 11,000 bags as we go into our third year. And it really, or fourth year, third or fourth year. And in theory, that means every Berkey skier has one. This year we charged $1 for a plastic bag, and I think we only sold about 600. So it really, again, using this as a tool to say, hey, we want you to buy this bag. We're not using plastic bags anymore. And it's pretty fun to see, again, back to the education advocacy part. This was something that they could touch and hold and they could be a part of. Because I think that the other part of it is everybody wants to play a part of being a part of something that's sustainable. And this was something they could get behind. Cupless was another big one, and I touched on that earlier in the other one. That getting rid of trash at events is so important, and we did it at the trail run successfully. We're trying to figure it out. How do we now do that at the Berkey, where it's a little bit more, it's a little bit more difficult in the winter. But interestingly enough, a silver lining of a pandemic starts to force you into creating new ideas at things like aid station, because now they have to be touchless. Well, we're going to figure out a way this year, if we do end up skiing in person, that we're going to feed people with liquids without them ever touching anything in a wide spread out area, which then means in the future, why would we not do the same and get rid of cups there? So, sometimes innovation comes from crazy places like pandemics. But in this case, getting rid of the amounts of trash that we produce was something that is important for us. And then solar. Solar runs the aid stations, and again, small benefit of not some of these places where we don't have to produce huge amounts of electricity. But I think another time that we all can recognize. But there's a little bit of a fine line here that we have to, I touched on it a little bit earlier in the partnerships. But moreover, what I wanted to touch on here was snowmaking and amenities, things like buildings, aid station amenities, which a plastic table isn't a real amenity. But the one I really wanted to touch on was this one, which was snowmaking. I can't tell you how many times in the last 10 days people have asked, well, we got to get our snowmaking up and going. And right now, it's a really, really inefficient time to make snow. It's not quite that cold. It takes a lot of energy to turn water into snow. So as much as we talk about the climate and the importance of keeping our trail and wanting to have snow, and now we're the 4th or 5th warmest November on record, what are we turning around and doing and using huge amounts of energy to make snow? So are we sort of not, saying one thing but doing something different? So I think internally we have big discussions now about, we want to make snow, and we want to get skiers out on snow, but are we being responsible climate citizens at that point if we're expending huge amounts of energy to do it? So, and it's not to say we're not going to make snow. Of course we'll make snow, but it might start to look at like some of the places in Europe that store snow. And you'd say, well, why is that more efficient? Well, if I can make snow in January when it's 15 below, it's super efficient to make snow. And I can blow it in a huge hole. I cover it with sawdust, and then I bring it back out in the spring. And or in the fall, and I don't have to expend huge amounts of energy to do it. So I'm not saying that's right or wrong or what we would ever do, but there are alternatives out there when we start to look at some of the demands of what our customers are wanting and asking for. But I think truly what ends up happening when you make, having those discussions as an organization, what's important to be sustainable, I think once you make those decisions, even if they're unpopular, people will follow you when they see you're doing the right thing. When you're trying to make the right call based on the right principles, they'll follow you eventually. They may push back initially, but I think over time, seeing what you're trying to do comes through. The other one is investing in the future financially. We talked about before why it's so important to have the organizations here for long term. I think one of the keys to sustainability is having infrastructure and financing in place that will last forever. So infrastructure, like let's use the water example, investing in infrastructure. So a well, we're going to have a well at an aid station. That means water will always be there for an event. Likewise, financially, I think too few events and organizations invest in an endowment or something that ensures the financing there for a long time. Having the group of folks that were willing to spend the time and energy and invest the dollars to create the endowment for the ABSF, while it's still small in terms of endowments, it's just over $1 million. Over time, it's going to grow. legacy gifts and people that believe in the organization are going to invest in it, so that it's going to come a time, just like schools and museums and other things, right? Emily works hard for people to invest in the endowment so that all of the services that can be provided by that event are always going to be there, or that organization. So I think investing in the funding of an event and organization often doesn't happen with small nonprofits. And I think it's really, really important. It's something we're spending time. The last thing that I think is super important is a voice. I think that often, too many times, events that feel like they just want to do their thing and stay under the radar, we do good things for the community. I think it's just the opposite. I think you have to find the best advocates you can, the people that are the strongest role models that can provide the message that you want to provide, get them out in front of the world and make sure that they can call your message out. And, I think somebody like Jesse and the U.S. Ski Team is a great example of that. They work really hard on climate solutions, protect our winters. They're out in front of it. And I think it's really, really important that we as organizations, if we want to be sustainable, we need to partner with people like this that can be really strong voices for what we want. Then the last thing I just wanted to touch on in the last couple minutes here is the sustainability of the future. The Berkey's taking in the middle of a huge undertaking, trying to revitalize Telemark. And I think when Tony started it, it really, he had visions and really truly believed it was going to be best for his community. Here was a guy that did, people loved him, people hated him for different reasons. But I think at the end of the day, what he really truly wanted was people to come here, and he wanted to help support his community. One of the interesting things about this building is we've started to look at it from the organization standpoint, that the insulation in that roof was like R3 or R4. So if anybody knows anything about insulation, that tells you that there's not much there more than a newspaper. So that while the idea of sustainability was getting people there, it was going to bring dollars there, is what he thought. The infrastructure that was there was so costly that it was just really, really hard to be sustainable. So that I think as we look into the future, when we look at putting our campaign together, in this case, we're going to call it Sustainable Telemark as an organization, as a property. What it really does for us is it talks about sustainability first and foremost. Yep, Sustainable Telemark is what we are and where we are. And sustainable has a bunch of different meanings. Sustainable from a business standpoint, sustainable from a climate standpoint, sustainable from a community standpoint. So it ends up, for a variety of reasons, becoming really important, because back to the very thing, if we're not here for kids to be, and we're not here financially for the community into the future, then I think we've failed at what we're trying to do. And lastly, I think from my standpoint, the vision that our staff uses is that everyone has the opportunity to live an active outdoor lifestyle. We think about that all the time, that are our actions today enabling everybody to have an opportunity to live this lifestyle through an event, through a program, through just going out and using the trail. That's something that's important to us. And that again, back to the sustainability piece, if it's not there forever, then no, not everybody's going to have that opportunity. So for us, it really drives home from this vision statement that ensures that sustainability part lives there. So I think, yeah, that's all I got. And I did it in 36 minutes. So I was a minute over. But anyway, so hopefully, I don't know if any of that resonates or doesn't, but I'd be happy to take any questions or whatever, and I can stop sharing the screen if anybody has any questions or anything about it.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben. I haven't seen anything coming in the chat, but if anybody wants to unmute yourself and ask a question, that'd be awesome. Go ahead.
This is Ed Hiltz. I have two questions. One, Ben, it had to do with the part of your presentation that dealt with safety. And I was wondering if the foundation is involved at all in trying to improve the cell phone service around the area, because there's a lot of people who come here who ski in the surrounding area, and getting emergency help because of the poor cell phone service is a real challenge.
Yeah. So yes and no. So the first step with safety is oftentimes location. So people not knowing where they are. So the county-wide effort right now is to, like the ATV trails have, essentially put a GPS number that every responder will have within their the 911 unit, so that all anybody would have to do is find a Canva intersection, a Birkie Trail kilometer marker, or an ATV, and there's going to be a number on there that when they read it to the caller or the 911, that they'll know exactly where they are. But to your question, the second part of that is, how do I get a hold of them? And interestingly enough, we've learned a little bit about cell coverage, and we were actually starting to go down the road of trying to create cell boosters. So timber trail areas and fire towers, some of the areas that don't have cell, could we boost the cell coverage in those localized areas? When we quickly realized, like, it kind of worked and it maybe works for an event, but again, that's only in one really small area. So we've actually started working with Verizon, and here's where the real issue comes in. So Verizon now has worked with us for 2 years. They've actually added a tower up north, which was awesome, and has really improved Verizon cell coverage almost entirely along the trail. But that's just the problem. That they've been a great partner and willing to spend money in the area, but AT&T, Sprint, the others they haven't. And so now, if you're in the area, Verizon actually probably 99% of the area you'll get really good coverage, but it's got to be Verizon. And so we've been able to make a little headway in like I said, with one carrier, but the others have had really no interest in because they don't see it as a way to monetize. All right, there's not enough users here paying their cell phone bill to justify the cost. And so it's made a little progress, but that's about all I can say there.
The other question I had was, could you give us an update on the foundation's effort to get a grant to renovate Telemark?
Yeah, actually, it was pretty exciting news yesterday. We got a $250,000 grant awarded to us from the state yesterday. And so that we had asked for $500,000, and they said, well, they gave us $250,000. So I guess that's 50%. But they did say, come back to us on January 1st, and we'll consider another $250,000. The removal of the building is going to be right at $730,000 to $750,000. And we've begun efforts to raise the remainder of the money, whether it's $500,000 or $250,000. But we were really excited that the state at least started with the first part of it, and we're hopeful that we'll get the remaining part in January. But that's where that stands of right now.
Thank you.
Yep.
And I have a related question submitted in the chat. Is Sustainable Telemark a subset of the foundation funding of the regular Berkey Foundation?
Yeah, so currently, the Sustainable Telemark as a program, meaning as we start to develop that being the fundraising and the sustainable part of that building or that property, is really focused on that specific property. So it's not necessarily, Sustainable Telemark isn't the bigger part of who we are in terms of what we're doing. But like Birkie Green is for our events, Sustainable Telemark is specific to that property. How do we make that property sustainable? And what are we going to do there to ensure that it is? I don't know. Does that make sense? Or whoever, I can clarify that more. Add if that doesn't. That was clear as mud.
Yes, Craig gave a thumbs up. He was the one who asked the question. So, yeah. Any other questions from folks?
I do know that somebody had sent me an email earlier about the sustainability of the event during things like pandemic. And I think, back to the endowment, we as an organization, we'll have a significantly smaller amount of racers this year. I think it stands at about 7,000 right now or similar. So for us, it's, it's a half or $750,000 of revenue we've lost. But I think it goes back to having an endowment and having donors and supporters and people that just sign up for the race not knowing what it's going to be, that it might just be virtual, that it could be, And I think that you have these advocates that support an organization, and again, back to the endowment and the planning to ensure that you are sustainable to get through really tough times, which now is obviously a really tough time. And so I think we will make it through the pandemic, and it won't be easy and it won't be great. But even if we have to have a weird event, what the biggest concern for us is, interestingly enough, is not necessarily making it through the next 6 months as an organization. For events, it's oftentimes a delayed effect. We had one of the hardest years since I've been here in 2018 following the 2017 cancellation. So what happens is you get this residual effect down the road. 2017 to this date was the single largest event the Berkeys ever been. 11,280 or 11,380, something like that. That never put their skis on that day. So it's the largest event of the Berkey that never happened. But since then, of course, you've now had to see then 2018, bam, down to 8,900, right? Because you're even though it was actually a really great skiing year, then the next year it builds back up and it builds back up. So one of our biggest planning challenges will be, how do we plan for 2022 based on what happens in 2021? You know, we don't know what's going to happen. It's still 100 days away. I mean, if the trend stays like this, the likelihood of in-person skiing is getting very, very low in a hurry, simply because, you know, it becomes very difficult on our health systems. We can provide safe events, but it can be really hard on our local health systems, of course. But we're hopeful that, we have to be hopeful, and hopefully people start following the rules, and we start to turn the corner a little bit, and we have less infections, and that might come, into January and February, we're able to start having some outdoor events, but we'll have to see.
I'm curious more about the Birkie Green, and if you found any of the initiatives to be particularly exciting to people, or that you've gotten negative feedback on too. What have been the best pros and cons of that?
So one of the interesting ones that I think the one that the staff really enjoys the most is the event side of Birkie Green, in terms of interactions. Things like zero trash. A solar panel at an aid station. No, that's not that exciting. But again, trying to figure out, how do you bring 10 or 11,000 people and end up with 10 bags of trash? If we had 1,000 people and we had 1 bag of trash, how do we have 10 bags of trash over 10,000 people? Those are the challenges that I think we really embrace as an organization. But then, one of the ones that I think Kurt and the trail guys have really, and gals, because Meredith is part of that, have really been thinking about is snowmaking. How can we do, whether it's buying carbon credits or solar offset from a snowmaking standpoint and energy consumption, buying into a solar farm, back to the idea of making snow in the middle of winter when it's efficient. But I think one of the things that I think is the most fun is the creativity part. It's not just X's and O's, black and white. That I think becoming more sustainable is about creativity and coming up with really good ideas. So I think that is actually by far the most fun, is the creative part of what it means to be sustainable.
And Andy Schwartz commented, from the Berkey Start Chief, Birkie Green resulted in significant, oh, we didn't finish the sentence. Hopefully significant improvements.
Significant. Right, exactly.
Oh, significantly less trash last year. So yes, and I volunteered with the Cool Planet folks down at the expo, and I stood guard over a trash can and had so much fun chatting with people.
Yeah.
Folks really wanted to do the right thing.
Yeah.
It was a really great way to interact too. So
one of the other things that I think is really important as a group of skiers or outdoor enthusiasts, I should say, is oftentimes we're not very vocal and we're not good at being really, let's get our cause. And I had the opportunity to lobby a couple years ago with the Protect Our Winters and the U.S. Ski and Snowboard group, and we were out in D.C. for a week. Just talking about, in my role was to talk about the importance of recreation, or winter and recreation in the economy of northern Wisconsin. And, you know, it was, to me, really enlightening, right? I mean, that's oftentimes, like it or hate it, where all the decisions are made, right? And I don't know if we oftentimes engage ourselves enough in that conversation. It was certainly new to me, and I realized the importance of us playing that role, and whether it's writing our congressmen and senators, whatever those steps might be. But I think that's really important, and more than ever now, to ensure that the things that are important to us, if it's snow or winter or a trail or erosion, gets taken care of. So.
Absolutely. We got another question in the chat from the Manleys. They asked, did you say we might have a solar energy array at the Telemark Outdoor Recreation Center eventually?
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be, we actually had a conversation just today with Gensler. It's a large design firm, actually the largest in the world. They have, they do a lot of sustainability things, and as one of the things that I think we've realized as an organization, what we're really good at is recreation. So we want to do some amazing recreation things at Telemark as a property, but the other things like net zero buildings, et cetera, we know nothing about. So we've been doing a lot of reaching out to find a hopeful partner that can help us with that. And one of the things that came up today, whether we use somebody like Gensler or not, hopefully they're looking at being interested in doing a lot of pro bono work. But there obviously there's really good people out there that do these things, that they were instantly like, well, you know, just on a matter of an hour call about, you know what, if you put solar here and did this and put your building like this, you can do this. And we just, Joe and Allison and I and Christine, we're just like, wow, okay. So that the idea, I think, Mike, and is absolutely that we're going to be able to partner with some people that are really good at this. Interestingly enough, and many of you know CXC, this is the firm that we learned from them. They're building a building right now in Madison in a very similar way that's meant to be a net zero building as well. And so it's right outside of Madison. It's beautiful. It's like, I can't remember if he said 18 or 24,000 square feet, but it's everything from an event space where people can have a wedding to a place where you can go get a coffee, but also a place that you can facilitate. I always call it the gateway to outdoor recreation, right? You need this gateway where you can go in, change your shoes, get comfortable, get whatever, and go out, but then welcomes you back in as well, especially for those that aren't sort of the hardcore, you know, I'm a skier, biker, runner, but I want to take my family out or my grandparents, or I just want to go for a walk. And it was fascinating to see some of these design elements in play at what they're doing in Madison with this building that I think integrated into the up here in cable could be just amazing. I think world class. We'll be back to the, you know, pretty cool stuff.
Awesome. Yeah, I think a lot of people, locals, are excited about the possibilities for Telemark being something again.
It's going to take a community, that's for sure. I think the idea, you know, there's a little bit different model this time around, and that our goal is we're going to lead the way and get it started, but you know, we're not going to own hotels or restaurants, but we're going to facilitate a space that allows for that to happen, so that we're each doing the things that we do well. And, you know, we know that we do events and outdoor stuff well. We don't do hotel rooms and catered food so well. So we're going to stay away from that.
Awesome. Any other questions from folks before we wrap this up?
Well, yeah, thanks for having me. Certainly for Emily and everybody. And if anybody has any questions, you know, I certainly feel free to reach out, and, you know, we're always open for great ideas or suggestions. So definitely let us know.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much for taking the time to share this with us, and a little virtual clapping.